In recent years, there have been articles and many experts talking about that for the first time since the 80s, the divorce rate is dropping in America. At first, this appears to be excellent news. Some reports now say that the divorce rate, which has hovered around 50% for several decades, now might be as low as 40%. Now, the question is why? It'd be nice to be able to paint a very rosy picture about it all, but the reality seems to say that isn't the case. For starters, many people are delaying marriage or not even getting married at all, while others simply just cohabitate with their partner. They live together as if they are married for several years, and then when the relationship breaks up, of course, they're not getting a divorce because they were never married to begin with. According to a 2019 study from the Pew Research Center, 59% of all adults between the ages of 18 and 44 have lived with an unmarried partner at some point in their life. Most experts who study these trends say that although the number has technically gone down, marriages are not much better, if at all, than they have been for many, many decades. You know, when I was asked to do this lesson on the impact of broken homes, the first statistic that came to my mind was something that was reported about a year ago. And it was a stat that kind of flew under the radar. And it simply said this, that if someone gets married, graduates high school, and does not have children to the age of 25, that the poverty rate for that person, regardless of race, is virtually zero. So let me say that again. If someone graduates high school, gets married, and does not have children until around the age of 25, that the poverty rate, regardless of race, is zero. Now that study kind of busts a myth that seems to be continually perpetuated in our society. There seems to be this myth that people just can't break out of their bad circumstances no matter what they do, that some people just are born in bad luck. But this study makes it pretty clear that if someone will make just a few good, major decisions in their life, that they can be successful. Think about it. Graduating high school means the individual at least put an effort into educating themselves. Getting married usually means there's some sort of stability in that person's life because they're able to have a relationship and a partner. And waiting till 25 to be married means, or till they have children, means that there's a level of understanding of how important it is to be stable before starting a family. And of course, if you waited till 25 to have children, that likely means you're married to begin with and the home is intact. Now, you may be thinking, Ryan, all this is really interesting, but what does it have to do with broken homes? Isn't that the title of your lesson? Well, I would argue that this particular statistic has everything to do with broken homes. Look, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, 19.7 million children, that's more than 1 in 4, are growing up without a father in their home. Now, when I say without a father in their home, I'm not just meaning a biological father. I'm meaning biological father, stepfather, adoptive father, that there is no father figure of any kind in that home. That means that almost 20 million kids in America have no father figure of any kind. You know what statistics say about children who have no father figure? They are more than twice as likely to drop out of high school. The girls are more than 7 times as likely to get pregnant as a teen. And because of these factors, it greatly increases their odds of not having stable relationships or marriages. As a matter of fact, these children are 4 times greater risk of being in poverty. The 3 factors of just finishing school, getting married, and not having children too young is enormous. These kids without a father in the home, they are more likely to have behavioral and psychological problems as well. They are more likely to commit crime. They are more likely to end up in jail, to face abuse and neglect, more likely to have drug and alcohol addiction problems, more likely to be obese and more likely to suffer some sort of serious physical health problem. We know that 70% of long-term prison inmates grew up in broken homes. I will tell you that I believe we have a crisis in America. And in a day where it seems like we have so many crises, I will tell you I don't think that our major crisis is things like racial justice or social justice. I think our problem is we are broken. We are broken. And in particularly, our homes are broken. We are the product of broken homes without fathers, without mothers, without stability, and without proper guidance. When half of our children are growing up in broken homes, and these are the statistics we see surrounding those broken homes, is there any wonder we are currently in the shape that we are in as a nation? I hear young people all the time say that they want to make a difference in the world that we are living in, that they want to make the world a better place, and they want to rally behind all these different political causes. Well, I think it's wonderful to want to make a difference, but if you want to make a difference, I think it might be important to finish high school, to make sure you marry the right person and you stay married, and make sure that you raise your children in a two-parent home that is loving, stable, and gives the children real discipline, real guidance and direction. And you will have made the biggest difference in this world that I think you can possibly make. Because, see, that's stopping this crazy, insane cycle that we've gotten ourselves into as a culture, where we commonly accept divorce and we commonly accept broken homes. Now, I think the statistics that we've talked about just in the last couple of minutes make my case. But I want to offer you a few more issues and a few more problems that we see with children growing up in broken homes. Before I really get into the meat of the lesson, I want to say this in advance. I am in no way trying to paint a doom and gloom scenario for all divorces. I know there are times when divorce can be beneficial to children, and that's really, really weird to say. But divorce is often positive in homes where there's domestic violence, where there's physical or sexual abuse, or where really harmful patterns occur. Obviously, the lesson I'm presenting today is not about just those situations, really at all. I also understand that sometimes divorces happen and a parent doesn't want that divorce, but their spouse maybe just left them and gave them no choice but to be in a single-parent home. That doesn't mean that you can't fight to create the best scenario possible for your child. Clearly, divorce is going to increase the likelihood that your child will face challenges, but I firmly believe we can work hard to provide solid, consistent support for children, not only during the process of divorce, but in the years after. So if you're in that situation, look, be aware that the things we are going to talk about are the things that kind of happen in a home that is broken. But with the right mindset, with the right preparation, you as a parent can try to battle against these things and set your children up for success no matter your scenario. So in no way am I pointing at broken homes and pointing at it being the fault of you as an individual if you find yourself in that situation. There are many, many people whose parents divorced and they made it just fine in life because they had a parent or parents or a step-parent or whatever that worked hard to help them overcome their challenges. And that can absolutely be done. But the point here is to talk about the impact of a broken home and that general situation. Look, a broken family can negatively impact every aspect of a child's development. The effects of a broken family can be really, really tough. And there are a lot of factors. The age of the child at the time of the divorce, the personality of the child, what the child's relationships were like with various family members. So not every situation is the same, and I recognize that. But let's begin by talking about a few of the normal things that are seen in a broken home. Number one is that physical health can be impacted for the child. Living through a divorce is a stressful thing, and it can take a physical toll on children. As a result, it is not uncommon for kids of divorced parents to experience more health-related issues than children who live in intact families. In fact, research shows us that adolescents whose parents have divorced are more likely to experience injury, accident, and illness than children whose parents have remained married. Children of divorce, according to statistics, are at greater risk of experiencing asthma, headaches, obesity, and speech deficits than children whose parents have remained married. Studies suggest children are 50% more likely to have physical health issues than peers from two-parent families. That seems like a weird and crazy thing, but the reality is it's true. And there are actually some physical reasons for this. Children in two-parent homes are more likely to get their yearly physicals. They are more likely to stay current on their vaccinations, to have their eyesight and their teeth examined on a yearly basis. So there are some things that are just because it's more difficult with one parent. But a second part of that, of course, is the stress that can be created for the child that makes the physical health part sometimes difficult. A second one that is very, very important is it impacts emotional health. You know, divorce is an emotional experience for everyone involved, and it can bring a range of conflicting emotions and feelings. And when these emotions and feelings are not dealt with in an appropriate way, it can create a lot of issues for a children's life. For instance, a 2017 study found that children living in intact nuclear families are about half as likely as children in step, blended, or one-parent families to have mental disorders or need psychological help. And different ages will handle the divorce differently and the emotional impacts differently. Little children, oftentimes what you will see are things like confusion about why mom and dad can't get along anymore and why their life is separated into two separate homes, oftentimes with their toys and their belongings split between the two places. Little kids often wonder if mom and dad can just stop loving one another. Is it possible that they could stop loving them? And you can see for a small child the kind of anxiousness that could create. Middle school children, it's a little differently. Sometimes they will fear that they did something wrong, and they will even wonder if it's possible that they are a reason for the split. This is especially true if there have been behavioral issues. That, of course, is not uncommon among middle schoolers, but because the reality is most middle schoolers get into some sort of trouble at one point or another. And so this pulls the instability right out from under them at a time when they're trying to figure out their own identity. They're trying to figure out who they are, what they believe in, what's important to them, what they want to be in life, and all of a sudden their family is falling apart. And then for teenagers can actually take it really hard. Teenagers often become angry and resentful, and that resentfulness can come out at one of the parents or even both of the parents and can sometimes completely destroy a relationship. Teenagers typically have no problems pointing fingers, placing blame, and sometimes they can really see through what mom and dad tells them and the image that mom and dad might be trying to present to them. They are usually old enough, smart enough to know what's going on, and they get angry about it. It's easy for them to view their parents as hypocrites because their parents are trying to tell them what to do, and they see their parents as someone who can't even figure out how to deal with their own struggles in their own life. One of the things that fascinates me the most about this topic is compared to children from homes who are disrupted by death, children from divorced families have been proven to have more psychological issues. One study suggests that 6 years after parents divorced, children are more likely to be lonely, unhappy, anxious, and insecure. And a big part of this potential emotional health is irrational fear and anxiety. You know, irrational fear and anxiety can create a lot of problems for an individual. Becoming anxious over little things, especially in social settings. You know, social anxiety is a real disorder, and it can be a very serious mental condition that can create debilitating effects for a young person's life. They worry about sometimes irrational things and irrational situations, things that for the rest of us who may not be experiencing that are just everyday situations. You know, if it's not undiagnosed in kids, sometimes adults may not even see it, or it gets passed off as shyness. But if nothing is done, it can take over every aspect of a child's life. Leaving the house to go to school can become unbearable. Talking to someone on the phone or in person can almost be too much for them to handle. And of course, in the worst case scenario, this can lead to severe depression. Now, even in really bad divorces, it is unlikely that a child will go into full-blown serious depression. But oftentimes what you will see is depression that is milder, but yet can negatively impact all kinds of things, like the way a child socializes, the way that they interact with others, making friends, or just feelings of negativity that get bottled up and can explode. All of those things are really important about affecting the mental health of a child. Another part about it that's often not thought about is it really heavily impacts the way parents parent. Parenting in broken homes usually becomes much more difficult. I think about it from this effort in a two-parent home, you kind of have a tag team thing that can go on. Not only do you have two parents, but the reality is in a two-parent home, usually one parent is better at handling certain situations than the other. So you can have scenarios where parents can play good cop or bad cop, and they can switch up their role depending upon the situation. Good parents usually have some sort of routine down, and they know what they are good at and what they're not good at. You know, I think about in my household, my wife is very good at being consistent and being a comforter. Two things that sometimes I'm not very good at. But I have a really good tendency of being able to help my kids process through their emotions. I'm good at helping them deal with failure or problems with their peers. And you put the two of us together and we usually do a pretty good job. But whatever your strengths or weaknesses are, two good parents in a healthy home work together. Studies show in a single-parent home, that's not the case for obvious reasons. One study just a few years ago said that mothers are often less supportive and less affectionate to their kids after experiencing a divorce. That makes sense, right? They are dealing with their own emotional problems. And sometimes they've got tacked on top of that financial difficulties. Additionally, that same study states that both parents tend to become less consistent and less efficient in their parenting and in their discipline. So you have a scenario where parents feel guilty. And sometimes because a parent feels guilty, they allow their children to get away with things that they might not have let them get away with before. And that might seem like a minor deal in the short run, but in the long run, that can lead to a lot of problems when the child is not being disciplined and allowed to just get away with things. So those things are really important. Parents and the way they parent is impacted. Another important thing is it can affect academic performance in a child. Research has consistently demonstrated that children in situations where their parents have been divorced earn lower grades than their peers. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to this, depending on the reason for the divorce. As I mentioned earlier, if the divorce was expected, if there was violence in the home or abuse in the home, sometimes a child's grades can go up and a child really excels being out of that situation. But as I said, those are not the cases that I'm necessarily referring to in this lesson. So although that can happen, it's not the norm. As a general rule, academic performance takes a negative hit. And there are lots of reasons for this. One is the obvious. The child may be struggling with the divorce. Their routine, their comfort, what they once knew is now no longer there. Parents, no matter how rocky a relationship might be, more times than not, parents are a child's rock, and they look to their parents for certain things in their life. There are also other scenarios that can create academic problems. Early on in a divorce, a child may have to miss time out of class to go to a court date. They may have to move to a new school, to a new city, to a new state. And here's a big one. They may also receive less parental involvement and direction with regard to their education because they are either living just with one parent or if they're bouncing between two homes. There are also potential economic problems as well because a household can drop 50% or more in the income level for one of the homes. But those combination of things put together, those things can create serious academic performance problems for children. And then we have a fifth one, and that is it impacts social skills and trust. You know, there are lots of reasons that social skills can be impacted for kids in this situation. The obvious is kids are often more angry and more withdrawn after parents divorce, and sometimes they just don't want to talk about it. You know, children of divorce are 4 times more likely to report problems with peers and friends than children whose parents have intact marriages. And children of divorce, particularly boys, tend to be more aggressive towards others than children whose parents did not divorce. And then we've got the trust piece of it. Oftentimes, children of divorce do not trust adults. Their whole world has fallen apart, and the 2 adults that they trusted the most in the world now no longer are united and no longer a team. And that is how some kids will view divorce. They banked on the 2 of you. They trusted you. You are all they have known. So when you can't work through your problems, they will often see that in a way of creating distrust, creating animosity, and then that animosity can bleed into having animosity and distrust of just adults in general. These trust issues are very important. They can create teacher-student problems, and most importantly, they can create problems in intimate relationships when they become adults. So it can create problems for their future marriages. And distrust is even more prevalent among divorced kids that have to deal with a new partner for their mom or dad. These kids are unlikely to take to the new partner, and if this person was a part in the reason why their parents got divorced, it's even worse. And then one more for this part of the lesson. It just stops kids from being kids. I think this is so important. You know, depending on the situation at the time of the divorce, a child may have to grow up very, very quickly, and this can have an impact. You know, a kid should be a kid, but in certain events such as a divorce, many have to display emotional maturity really beyond their years. They may not want to, but maybe they have to take on greater responsibility around the house and just in life in general. Maybe they have to carry some emotional baggage that just forces them to grow up too fast. But because a member of their household is missing, they may have to carry an extra burden, household chores, and then helping that single parent with a lot of things that really the other parent should be doing. Many kids also have to deal, just like I said, with the emotional baggage, and it keeps them from being carefree. And I'm a firm believer in that. You know, I believe kids should have discipline, they should have guidance, they should have boundaries, but I also think they should live pretty carefree lives when they're young. And I'm not saying when I say that they shouldn't have to deal with challenges or obstacles. I absolutely think all kids need that. That's healthy. But you don't want to rob a kid of the opportunity just to be a kid. Having to deal with heavy emotional baggage at a young age is just something no kid should have to go through, especially if it's because their parents couldn't figure it out. You know, I'm a huge music fan. I've said that in a couple of the other lessons. And sometimes music has a way of painting a picture of real life that can be jarring. Back in 2004, you've probably never heard this in a lesson at church before, but a rock band named Green Day released an album called American Idiot. Now, obviously, I don't agree with or endorse all the things a band like that may say or sing about. But this particular album was a concept album that focused on the storyline of a kid growing up in modern-day suburbia. And in the lyrics throughout that album, The writer describes his parents, and he describes his parents as Mom and Brad, not Dad. He talks about the fairy tale world, the fake world that they all live in. Fake here, as you probably guessed, is this world of pretending and acting like everything is okay when it's not. He points out the hypocrisy that his parents live in. He talks about the drug use, which starts out simply with Ritalin and turns into alcohol, pot, and eventually cocaine. And as he gets ready to leave his home as a young man, he says this in the lyrics: "I don't feel any shame. I won't apologize when there ain't no place you can go. Running away from pain when you've been victimized. Tales from another broken home." I think these lyrics and the lyrics throughout that album are tough to hear, but I think they represent the feelings of an entire generation. A generation that grew up in messed up, fake, hypocritical, broken homes. The author in this piece is clearly crying out for something more, for a life that is better than what his has been. And when approximately 50% of our homes are broken, and of the 50% that stay together, many are unhappy and miserable, and for all purposes broken, we have a problem. We have a crisis. So what do we do about it? You know, in this crazy world that we seem to be living in with all of its issues and problems, with so many broken homes, do our kids even have a chance? I really believe the answer is yes. I really believe they do. And there are a few things that we can teach our kids to make sure they get on the right track, no matter what their situation is. And I really don't think they're that difficult. So what can we do? And here's the first thing I want to point out. Teach your children the ways of God. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it." Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning in verse 5 says this: "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates." Teach your children the ways of God. I know sometimes that sounds really, really simple, and I don't even know if I should say this, but as a counselor, you know, when I sit in a room with people, many times the things I'm teaching them are simply godly principles. I'm teaching them very simple things oftentimes that are based in biblical truths. If we teach our children simple biblical truths, we are setting them up with a foundation to help them throughout their entire lives, no matter what the situation is they grew up in. I think that's really important because that's something any parent can do. That's something a single parent can do. That's something a mother or a father in a very hostile, volatile marriage can do. That is something we can all do with our children. Teach them the ways of God. I think number two, and it's a very important one, is to be an authoritative parent. You know, something I haven't talked about here in this series of lessons. Every now and then I get asked to teach about parenting styles and what are the best ways and styles in which to teach children. And I think although there are probably dozens and dozens of different styles depending upon who you ask and the books that you look at, one of the ones that I've always loved is authoritative. Most experts will tell you being an authoritative parent is the right way to go. Because an authoritative parent is all about balancing things. They listen to their children. They allow their children to express opinions. They encourage their children to discuss options, and they foster independence in reasoning. But at the same time, they place limits and consequences and expectations on their children's behavior. They express warmth and nurturing, but they also administer fair and consistent discipline when rules are broken. And while a parent who is authoritative might have high expectations, they're flexible. If there are extenuating circumstances in a situation, they adjust their responses to that accordingly. And discipline takes into account all the different variables, the child's behavior, the situation, and so on. Research has shown over and over and over again that children raised by authoritative parents tend to be more capable, more happy, and more successful. Research says an authoritative parent raises children that have happier dispositions, have good emotional control and regulation, that they develop good social skills, and they are self-confident about their abilities to learn new things. Authoritative parents are role models, and they exhibit for their children the same behaviors that they expect from their children. In other words, they don't tell their children what to do, they show their children what to do. And because of this, their kids are more likely to internalize these behaviors and exhibit these behaviors. Consistent rules, consistent discipline, and a child always knows what to expect. These parents tend to exhibit good emotional understanding and control, and their children also learn how to handle their emotions and to understand others. Authoritative parents also allow their children to act independently. This teaches kids they are capable of accomplishing anything on their own, and it creates strong self-esteem and strong self-confidence. I always think about this when I talk about parents as, TV characters are always a good place to look because TV has a wide range of characters that kind of display good and bad traits. And I always think of, even though it's an older show, I think of Mike and Carol Brady from the Brady Bunch. I think about Andy Griffith. If we were going to put a label on them, they would be what we would call authoritative parents. A balance between authoritarian and permissive. Authoritarian parents have rules, boundaries, and expectations. And that's what's important. And at the same time, they allow their children to be their own person. They experience warmth and expectation. And they let their children know that they are always there for them. They're serious, yet their parents love them. They are strict, but warm and supportive. These are the kind of kids that become successful. And you think about it, that's biblical, and that's what's so important here. Solomon, 26 times, he begins his instructions with "my son." And he gives readers the impression that he is lovingly giving advice and wisdom to his son. In Proverbs 1:8, he warns, "My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother." He says, "My son, if your heart is wise, my heart will rejoice. Indeed, I myself, yes, my inmost being will rejoice when your lips speak right things. Hear, my son, and be wise, and guide your heart in the way." As you read Solomon's words there, you can see that he is authoritatively instructing his son. But he's also encouraging him to make a choice on his own. That's what authoritative parents do. They want their children to think, to make wise, reasoned decisions. They don't make the decisions for them. I think this kind of parenting is the right way to go. And I think it's especially important in broken homes because it gives that balance of emotional stability that a child needs, yet it gives them boundaries and guidance. Psalm 136, verse 11 says this, "And brought Israel out from among them, for his steadfast love endures forever. With a strong hand and an outstretched arm, his steadfast love endures forever." And then Proverbs 13:24 says, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him." Be an authoritative parent. That's good advice for parents not in broken homes, but it is especially good advice for parents that are in broken homes. Number 3, again, another very simple thing, but a profound thing. Build an open and honest relationship with your child. So many parents make the mistake of not building real, deep relationships with their children. I'm not talking about being your child's best friend. I'm talking about taking time to get to know your child, being open, being real, being authentic with them. As we just talked about a minute ago, many of the kids that come from broken homes see their parents as hypocrites. They see their parents as not being real. When I quoted the lyrics from the song American Idiot, that was one of the biggest problems with the parents, is that they felt like their parents were fake people. Let your kids know you aren't perfect. Let your kids know that you struggle, that you're human, but that you absolutely have their best interest in mind. You know, if your kids see an honest attempt to genuinely care about their well-being, most kids respond to that. I think most parents do want the best for their children, but I think so many parents fail to actually show their children that. So many parents are almost afraid to let their guard down, to be authentic around their kids, to say, I'm sorry, I messed up and I made a mistake and I'll make it right. I would encourage that, to find real, open, honest communication. And that starts when they are young. Children don't just want rules. And what's interesting, research and studies actually show children do want rules. They want guidance. They want to know where the boundaries are, but they want more than that. They want to understand why the rules are in place. They want to understand why the boundaries exist. And the more that you can show them that, the more that they will love and appreciate not only the rules, but you. And I think that is very, very important. I think about the way our kids sometimes view God. Sometimes you'll have a teenager tell you, I just feel like coming to church and being a Christian is just a list of rules, of things that I should and shouldn't do. Well, what they're missing there is the relationship with God. And they're missing the fact that those things are there because God wants to give them the best life possible, that He's being their Father, that He's guiding them and telling them that if you do these things that I don't want you to do, it will hurt you, and I don't want to see you hurt. The same thing happens with parents, with their children at home. Sometimes kids just feel like their parents are authoritative in giving them a list of things they can do and not do. If kids know why rules are in place, they respond to that. If they know you have their best interest in mind, they respond to that. I think those things are hugely important. And last but not least, I think it's important that those from broken homes use extended family and church family. You know, growing up, I make no bones about this. I had a difficult relationship with my dad. My dad and I didn't always get along, and sometimes we still have trouble getting along. But I had an outstanding relationship with both of my grandfathers. My two kids are named after my grandfathers. Those men meant the world to me. Their love, their caring, their guidance, their direction, that filled some of the holes that I had from my tough relationship with my dad. I know that many grandparents can make an enormous impact in children's lives. I also know this. I also know that oftentimes in churches that there are what we would call adoptive parents or grandparents. My kids have tons of people at our church that almost view them as their own grandkids because they love and care about them so much. There are people in our churches willing to mentor, willing to guide, willing to be a listening ear or a shoulder for a child that is struggling. We need to use that. We need to use those people because those people can be a wonderful, wonderful resource, especially in broken homes with children that need some extra love, some extra guidance, and a hole filled for a parent that is missing. You know, I'll end by saying this. Raising children in broken homes, it's tough. But if we lean on God, if we use the right parenting styles, if we have real, genuine relationships with our kids, and we use extended family and church family, I really do believe we can make a world of difference for those children, no matter what their circumstances is. Being in a broken home doesn't mean you have to be a statistic. You can fight through that and overcome that. It's just a different set of challenges that we have to focus on and that we have to be aware of. Again, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and I hope this lesson today has been something of benefit to everyone. Thank you.
All right, so Ryan Daniels, we're back, and this is sort of a bittersweet moment because I think this is our last Q&A.
Yeah.
But I have been really very happy with how this has gone over the last several weeks, and I'm excited that we've come to this point because all good things must come to an end. So
it's been fun. It really has.
Yeah. So you're ending on, I think, something that is really important. Not that any of the others weren't important, but the fact is there are a lot of broken homes in America. And sometimes kids may feel guilty about that, but they need to realize it's not their fault in that situation. And as a church, as leaders, as families, I think our primary focus is how do we help kids be more successful?
Yeah, and it's tough because, as you said just a second ago, a lot of kids are dealing with it. I mean, studies show that we have about 50% divorce rate. Actually, technically, I mentioned this in my lesson a minute ago. The divorce rate is actually decreased, but it's because of things like cohabitation and things like that.
People don't get married.
Yeah, it's not because that the marriages are all of a sudden better.
Right.
So we have a lot of kids that are in this position, millions. In the lesson I mentioned that there are 20 million kids growing up without a father in the home, and when I say without a father, I'm talking without a biological father, without a stepfather, without an adopted father. There's just not a father. Period.
And there's got to be an effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about how do you help single parent homes raise these children? In the lesson, I kind of raised the alarm bells of all of these things that happen statistically to kids in single parent homes, and it's tough. I think we've got to utilize our support systems around us. I think about grandparents. And if grandparents are in the picture, the role that grandparents can play. If a kid doesn't have the father in the home, think about the role the grandfather could play in that child's life, or if it's a rare, but if the child has a mom but doesn't have, has a dad but doesn't have a mom in the home,
sure, the
grandmother can play that role.
Right.
So there are some, and most honestly, a lot of grandparents are happy to do that in those scenarios. I also think there's other support systems. You think about church. I mean, my kids basically have adopted grandparents, at the church.
Yeah.
So there are lots of support systems if we look for them. I think a lot of times people don't want to use them or they feel embarrassed to ask for help. Mm-hmm. I think we've got to do that with our kids, though, especially in this situation, because kids need that influence from both a man and a woman. They need that mother and father figure. And so they've got to find that somewhere. And I think we've got to be cognizant of that and use that and make sure that's happening.
Right. And I think sometimes when we're talking specifically about the single parent home, sometimes I've known single parents that have felt a little bit on the outside of a church situation.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that we can do as a church to make sure that they don't feel that way, and they, even though they may not be in the male-female husband-wife situation, you're still part of the church. We still love you and care for you. How can we help?
Yeah, and I think that is a case where we've got to be aware of our surroundings. If we see a single mom, we need to be reaching out to her and asking, are there ways that we can help? I think about it's really cool. My neighbor, he used to be a big brother to a child.
That's interesting.
And so he would actually go pick up this child on like a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon, and they'd go fishing together. They would go do fun things together, and so he played this fatherly role in a sense, or a big brother, whatever role, to this boy who just didn't have a male in his life, and he became that male for him.
Nice.
And you think about how we can do that in church. There are opportunities for that if we reach out for that, and so just we've got to be aware of it. And sometimes it requires us being a little more proactive than just sitting back waiting for someone to ask us.
Yeah, because not everyone's going to come forward. That's really awkward sometimes for people to think that. And
yeah,
I think it's important to make sure that we don't treat people like they are less than.
Yeah. That's huge.
That's a big deal.
Yes.
Otherwise, we're creating some barriers that God did not intend in that regard. So, what are some of the things that a single parent can do to help their child become more spiritually successful?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that we don't talk about enough is in single parent homes, oftentimes a single parent will change the way in which they parent. And what I mean by that is they will either become too strict, really, really strict, or oftentimes, and this is the most common, is oftentimes they are kind of a little looser because they feel guilty that they, maybe that they're in this situation. And so they kind of let their kid get away with a little more than they might under normal circumstances.
Right.
And so that may not seem like a big deal at first, but think about what that does long term. If I'm a little more permissive to my child and allow them to get away with a little more than I normally would, over time as they get older, that starts to become a big problem.
Yeah, I can't see how it wouldn't stack up.
Yeah, and that to me is a big thing. Is we have to be careful to be really honest about how we parent in a single parent situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that and transition a little bit into marriage itself. Because even in that situation, or if there is a mom and a dad at home, having children who understand marriage, I think, is absolutely critical in this. God designed marriage, and but I wonder about the teaching of marriage. Would you care to comment about?
Yes, that is one of the biggest things, because really that's where this whole crazy cycle starts.
Okay.
I'm a really big believer that we do a poor job of in the church and even outside of the church of marriage is something that is worth fighting for.
Yeah, absolutely.
My grandparents were married 63 years before my grandfather passed. And around the time that they had been married about 60 years, I asked him, because I was like college age at that time. And I said, how have you and grandmother made it so long? And he said, well, can I tell you a secret? He said, I've thought about killing her many times. But he said, I never.
That's now on tape.
Yeah, I know. And he said, but I never thought about divorcing her, not once.
Sure.
Because we were going to make it. No matter what, we were going to make it.
Right.
And that's really stuck with me, because if you look at the divorce rate when he was young and got married, the divorce rate in America was like, I don't know exactly, but it was like 10-15%. When that generation was getting married.
It was not an acceptable thing.
That's right.
It didn't enter your mind.
Yeah, and so they fought a lot harder for their marriages. And I think we need to train our children to understand marriage is tough. Like, it's not Cinderella. This is not a fairy tale. It's hard. And that doesn't mean it's not incredibly enjoyable. It doesn't mean you can't have amazing relationships, but there may be times where it's tough. And when it's tough, we don't walk away. It's kind of like we were talking about with resiliency. I mean, it's the same concept. Right. This whole generation is growing up not being resilient. So what happens if I'm not a resilient person and my wife and I have issues or problems? How quickly will I give up compared to somebody that goes, like my grandfather said, we're not divorcing. We're going to figure it out. Those are two totally different mindsets. And I think that's where we get into this kind of cycle. And I think in churches, one thing that we need to do, we talk about the most important decision that you're going to make in your life is the decision to obey the gospel.
Absolutely.
The second most important decision that you're going to make in your life, if you get married, is who you marry.
Absolutely.
How much time do we spend talking about that topic?
Right. It's almost like it's a thing that hangs out there and we just kind of naturally figure that out, but that's not a thing you naturally figure out. Right. It has to be taught.
Yes. I had a scenario, and I almost hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. I had a scenario a couple of months ago in counseling where I had these two wonderful young people that I counseled.
Okay.
And they were coming to me for premarital counseling. They were having some issues. They were having a handful of issues. And we counseled for a couple of months, and they broke up. And at first, you walk away from my perspective and going, gosh, I can't believe, after doing all that, I basically split this couple up. Which, I really didn't split them up, obviously, but you know what I mean. Like that,
Sure.
the process of counseling did it, until I got a phone call from both of them thanking me. Because they both recognized that going through counseling, going through the rigors of that premarital process, that they weren't right for each other. And that they did not think that this was going to be a good marriage. Both of them believed that. And it just hit me that, like, what if every young couple had to do something like that? Sure. And sit down with somebody that challenged them and pushed them on topics and made them work through it. And, there's a part of you who walks away, again, initially you feel awful, but then I walk away now and go, I may have just saved them. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way, but I'm just saying we may have just saved them from a lifetime of misery.
Absolutely.
And issues and problems, because what we did is we dealt with it on the front end. And it became pretty apparent that they were going to have problems if they stayed together. Why can't we do more of that? And now what happens is when they go out and they find other people to get married, because we went through that process, they will think really hard about the next person they are with.
You've equipped them
to
be able to make some decisions.
And that's what we need to do more of, is to give them some equipping to deal with those things.
That is such a critical thing for the church to do. And of course, we're going to equip them for evangelism. We teach them to door knock. We teach them how to talk through issues. But this thing is so important to teach them how to deal with the relationships and how to pick the right person. And it's not just about the warm, fuzzy feelings that you get. And you're like, we'll be together forever. Hopefully, but there has to be an intellectual side of that where you're willing to confront those things. So.
And that's you hit on something when you said the warm, fuzzy feelings that I think is really important. And I will, when I deal with a premarital couple, one of the things I bring up at the very beginning is we will talk about, and it's kind of pouring cold water on the situation in the beginning, but we will talk about, do you know what happens to you when you fall in love? When you fall in love, your brain is flooded with chemicals. Your brain is flooded with serotonin, oxytocin, all these chemicals. I'm not a brain expert, but I know that that's what happens. Your brain's flooded with all those chemicals. And that gives you that addictive feeling of where you want to be around a person all the time.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
God made it that way.
God made it that way. But just be aware you're a drug addict, And one of the things that I talk about is that situation happens and stays that way for months. Anywhere from, most experts say, 9 to 18 months that you'll experience kind of that high, right, of being in love. But what happens is that over time begins to fade and to go away. And it doesn't mean that occasionally you can't tap back into that and feel that kind of emotional high. But in general, it starts to fade away over time. And what you are now left with is the relationship that has been built between the two people.
Right.
And you think about that. When marriages end, and I can say this because I hear it all the time in my office, people come in and they go, I just don't feel about them the way that I used to.
Yeah.
Well, why not? Well, probably because this crazy emotional high that they felt, and this is getting really real, but oftentimes in those first 9 to 18 months, people are concerned about having sex, or they are concerned about things that they shouldn't be doing, and they're not building the relationship. Right. You're not building
the real things of substance.
That's right. And you want to build those things. And if you're building the right relationship and you're building the relationship in the right way, then what happens is when that starts to go away, those feelings, now your relationship has become about the individual and about the relationship and not about the way you feel. And if you look at how the Bible talks about love, the Bible does never talk about love in form of a feeling.
Right.
It is always about a willingness to give myself up for another person. Husbands, love your wife as Christ loved the church.
That's a strong call.
Yes, you're not called to love your wife because you have ooey feelings in your stomach about them.
Right.
You are to love your wife as Christ loved the church. That's sacrificial. That's a giving up of yourself. And to me, that's what we miss. We miss teaching that element of it and that fight of it. Because what we do is when it gets tough, a lot of people just walk away.
When do we start teaching that?
When?
Yeah.
When do we or when did we?
When do we start teaching that?
I think we start teaching it right now.
Yeah. Like a 5-year-old can process that on some level, Yeah.
I really think it should begin like in, like junior high.
Yeah, for sure.
Young. When the idea of what love is, I actually think that's one of the biggest things is what is love? And that it is not about the way you feel. Because here's the thing as a therapist, do you know what I say almost on a daily basis? Your feelings may be real. You may really feel that way, but your feelings are not always accurate.
That's so true. That is so true. How hungry you are, how tired you are, that can all shift your feelings.
Exactly.
Just like that. So,
yeah.
Well, let's close with that. Any final comments? That's been awesome what you've just said there, and obviously I'm just going to let you talk for the vast majority of it because it's so important that those things are said and we actually put those into practice. God designed marriage and He wanted us to be successful in them, but we need to put the effort into training people to have that success.
Yeah, and I think, at the end of the day, I keep thinking over and over again when it comes to marriage and when it comes to counseling, it's that thing of where feelings can't overtake us. That's kind of close with this. That's one of the things that concerns me the most about where we are in our world today is people focus on the way they feel.
Yes.
And they don't really focus on anything beyond that. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's kind of a very low-level thought, or low-level thinking. Just because I feel a certain way, my feelings need to be challenged. I'm not saying your feelings aren't real, but they need to be challenged, and we need to focus on kind of going beyond the way I feel, And I think about if I think about with my wife and with my marriage, if there are times that it's not easy, and I think everybody would tell you that, and I'd say that if my wife was sitting here, by the way, so I'm not going to get in trouble for saying that. It's not easy. But the thing is if I love her the way that Christ loved me and that Christ loved the church, then I'm going to fight for our marriage. And just because we're struggling with something, if we are, that's not going to cause me to want to walk away. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got to start teaching and preaching that to our kids. And at the end of the day, what does that create? That solves the problem of this whole lesson that I've been given about broken homes, because now broken homes won't exist in that form.
Absolutely.
So that's really where it starts, is starting teaching our children about those things.
Well, I appreciate those thoughts, Ryan. I really do. As I said before, it's been really good. We've been so blessed to have you here. Don't be a stranger.
Yeah.
And you feel free to come back anytime.
I will.
Thanks so much. And until next time, take care.
Thank you.